corruptible. He was not going to come around.
Now that presents a big problem to this entire scheme of things, and it means that things have to be escalated to the next echelon.
It does, but it also meant that nobody needed to waste my time by sending me over there and mucking around to try to make it happen, because it wasn't going to happen.
That way.
That way. And so, of course, I'm pulled off the case. I know that the next step is to send in the jackals. I don't know what that's really going to involve. I don't know what's going to happen. A little while later, I watched on television in horror as what actually did happen unfolded. And what happened was we sent in a team of assassins from South Africa, 45, 46, I don't remember the exact numbers, it's in the book, and to not only assassinate the president, but also overthrow his entire government. And we had a force of all African force stationed in Nairobi, Kenya, to fly in and take credit once this assassination team had done their job. They would disperse quietly, and nobody would know that they were there, or they would think this was a group of African.
More of an indigenous type of a situation.
Right. The whole African continent had basically gone against Rene, but it never worked out that way, because the attack group, the assassin team, was discovered at Mahi Airport, at Seychelles Airport. A guy with a gun on him was discovered, and a huge gun battle broke out. And this team of assassins was surrounded by perhaps 1,000, they estimated, people defending Rene and closing in on them in the airport. And later I would become good friends with one of the leaders of this group. I didn't know him at the time, the assassin group, and he told me that it was one of the few times in his life where he felt he wasn't going to make it out and had time to think about it. That he'd many times been faced with near death, but he always just had to react. This time he had time to think about it. Anyway, to make a long story short, the longer version's in the book, eventually in Air India 707 asked permission to land. The assassin team granted the 707 permission to land. There's a firefight breaking out all around them, but the Air India plane couldn't see it happening. Landed, and the team hijacked the airplane, flew it to Durban, South Africa. So I'm watching this on television, and seeing all this unfold. And the plane is surrounded by South African security forces. The would-be assassins give themselves up. They're hauled off to prison. They're sentenced to various sentences, life, execution, whatever. And that's what the world sees. And, you mean
once they returned to South Africa with a hijacked airplane?
Right. They were taken prisoner.
Right.
What actually happened was that when they got back to, and I found this out many years later because I'd become good friends and still am with one of the leaders of this group, who's now working for us in Iraq, and making a lot of money doing things that he knows how to do quite well, apparently. Exactly, and the military is prohibited from doing. In any case, so what actually happened was that the plane was surrounded by security forces in Durban, and the security forces got on the phone to the hijackers and discovered these hijackers were their teachers, their good friends, their drinking buddies. They worked out a deal. The hijackers gave themselves up. They were taken to a prison. They were given their own wing of the prison, apparently with television and basically pretty much anything they wanted. And after 3 months, were quietly released. The world, of course, didn't see that. 7 hijackers had been left behind in the Seychelles. They decided to stay rather than take off in the airplane because they were afraid it was going to be shot down. They were taken prisoner. And the government of South Africa, at this point, 3 months later, gave Francis Rene $3 million, and he quietly released those prisoners. But what's interesting is that although everything seemed to be a failure, the economic hitmen couldn't do what we wanted to do, the assassins failed. That same year, 1981, Omar Torrijos was assassinated because of an economic hitman failure. Something you talk about in your first book. Right. Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, president of Ecuador, also in your first book, was assassinated by jackals. Rene saw the writing on the wall. He almost got assassinated. Had it not been for a very alert security guard, he saw what happened to 2 other presidents, and he got his $3 million. And so he basically became our friend. He did not expose the Seychelles. It's unexposed since by the BBC, and right now there's a huge lawcase going on about it. But he remained our friend, and he remained president until 2002, and never never came after the United States. In 2002, his former vice president became president of Seychelles. So even though it appeared that we failed all the way along the line, in fact, in the end, our government and the corporatocracy got exactly what they wanted.
I know one of your motivations is, and I'd like you to speak to it, with this kind of apparatus in place, operating under the radar of the goodwill of the American people, who probably wouldn't stand for it if they knew the in-depth details that you've described in this book and in the previous one. In secret, democracy is being subverted around the world. How is it that the people in our country who are employed doing this, how can they keep their hands off our own democracy if they don't like what they see, especially if they're so good at doing this without anyone knowing what it is that they're up to?
Tommy, that's a very key question, a very profound question. I don't think they can keep their hands off our own democracy, and I think what we've been seeing in the last few years with the Patriot Act, with the attacks on our own liberties in this country, is that very thing going on. And we're seeing the middle class in this country dwindling. We're seeing the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We're seeing social services taken away. The threat of losing Social Security and Medicare is there. Our big corporations are doing less and less in terms of providing insurance to people and providing job security to them. So that I think what we've been doing overseas, we're now beginning to do more and more here.
These things are all standard fare in places like Central America and so forth, where in parts of Asia, where the population is sort of like the bacteria that produces the yogurt, and that's about it, right? And it sounds like what you're saying is that there's so much money that's been made this way that the urge to convert America back toward the good old days, we had slavery here, let's not forget, is too hard to resist.
I'm afraid that's true, and I think the flip side of that is that it's a great lesson in that I think we in the United States have been willing to turn a blind eye to what's been going on in other places because we've lived such a good life. So, if I can buy a T-shirt and a sports jacket for a lot less money because there's a slave shop someplace, a sweatshop in Indonesia, the Philippines, or somewhere, then maybe I don't really worry that much about it because I'm really happy with the prices that I'm paying for things. We can get very inexpensive gasoline, really. I mean, some people wouldn't agree with me, but it is.
Comparatively speaking to Europe, for instance.
Well, and not just that, but when you consider all the incredible damage that's being done to places like the Amazon and to cultures and societies in these countries, and turn a blind eye because we live such a good life. But what we're finding now is that because we've sacrificed our own principles and overseas, because although we got rid of slavery in the United States, we do have slavery all over the world. It's providing us with things in our lives. And now it's coming back to haunt us. So part of the lesson here is you've got to be principled. And we need to now reestablish these principles for our own protection and then also for the whole world.
The success of the first book must have taken even you a bit by surprise, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your life, I'm sure, has changed dramatically since then. Have you been encouraged in what you've started with the discussions that you've started with your first book and to this one?
Deeply encouraged, Tom. I first started this tour for the hardback edition in November of 2004, and we had good crowds showing up. The word got around very quickly. The book went to the top of Amazon and the New York Times list pretty soon, and people asked pretty good questions. But a year later, when I went back on tour, when the paperback came out, much bigger crowds, much bigger, overflowing crowds, and people asking more profound questions. The level of awareness, the level of education that I saw in that year was deep. It was profound. It was gratifying. And while I'd like to take all the credit for it with my book, Confessions, the fact is a whole lot of books came out during that period, and movies like Syriana and The Constant Gardener, and since then Blood Diamond, and Good Night, Good Luck, and
Lord of War. Nicolas Cage was in that movie, The Lord of War, based on a true story of an international arms trader.
Correct, and stories about the CIA, Al Gore's movies, and a lot of documentaries questioning what really happened at 9/11, and
Good Shepherd, and so forth.
Tremendous. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of information that's going out there. People are questioning all this business around 9/11.
John Perkins, with his new book, Secret History of the American Empire. I'm sure